They sent her away like trash. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Ujeta stood at the edge of town, the weight of her past as heavy as the single suitcase in her hand. Chicago's skyline loomed in the distance, a stark contrast to the small town landscape of Millfield that had both raised and rejected her. The autumn wind carried whispers of memories she had tried to bury for 15 years. Faces flashed before her eyes, her father's downcast gaze, her mother's silent tears, the townspeople's scornful stares. She had been just 19 when they drove her out, too vibrant, too independent, too much of everything they feared in a young woman. One day I'll come back, not to beg, but to show you who I really am. The words she had thrown back at them now echoed in her mind like a prophecy fulfilled. She wasn't returning in shame or in search of forgiveness. She was coming back with purpose, with plans, with the quiet dignity that had grown within her. Through years of struggle and triumph, the bus terminal was almost empty as she stepped off the last step, her sensible heels clicking against the concrete. 15 years had changed her. Gone was the wild-haired girl with defiant eyes. In her place stood a woman of 34, her dark hair now elegantly styled, her clothes simple but clearly expensive, her posture straight with the confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from knowing your own worth. Ujeta took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the familiar scent of oak trees and river water. She hadn't come back to seek revenge on those who had wronged her. That would be too simple, too expected. No, she had returned to heal, not just herself, but the very community that had once deemed her unworthy. As she walked down Main Street, she felt the weight of stares, some curious, some disbelieving, a few hostile. The town hadn't changed much physically, the same red-bricked stores, the central square with its aging gazebo, the church steeple puncturing the sky. But there was a weariness to it now, a quiet desperation that hadn't been there before. Storefronts stood empty, their windows dusty with neglect. Children's laughter, once abundant, was now a scarce commodity. She paused outside what had once been the town library, her sanctuary during those tumultuous teenage years. The sign declared it temporarily closed, but the faded lettering and boarded windows suggested a more permanent condition. This was just the first of many wounds she intended to heal. A figure emerged from the general store across the street, and Ujeta's heart stuttered. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had once led the charge against her, whose venomous words had poisoned the town against a girl whose only crime was refusing to conform. Their eyes met across the distance. Recognition dawned on the older woman's face, followed by shock, then something Ujeta couldn't quite decipher. Fear, perhaps, or shame. Ujeta didn't look away. She didn't smile, didn't frown. She simply acknowledged the woman with a slight nod before continuing her journey. She had a meeting to attend, and she would not be late. Not today. Not when every minute, every action was part of a carefully orchestrated plan 15 years in the making. The mayor's office was at the end of the street, a modest brick building that served as the heart of local government. Mayor Wallace, formerly Councilman Wallace during Ujeta's time, had agreed to meet with her, though he hadn't sounded pleased about it on the phone. No doubt he remembered the scandal, the division her presence had once caused. No doubt he feared she had come to stir up old troubles. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted her stiffly as she entered his office. He had aged considerably, his once dark hair now silver, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. "Welcome back to Millfield." "Thank you, Mayor Wallace," she replied, her voice steady and professional. "I appreciate you making time for me today." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and she sat, placing her handbag beside her. The office was cluttered with papers, budget reports, and what appeared to be property foreclosure notices. Millfield was struggling, just as her research had indicated. "I'll be direct," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm here to make an investment. In Millfield, his eyebrows rose in surprise. Whatever he had been expecting, it wasn't this. What kind of investment? He asked cautiously. Ujeta reached into her bag and retrieved a folder, sliding it across the desk to him. I've established a foundation focused on revitalizing small American communities. Millfield will be our first project. As he flipped through the documents, his expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment. The proposals were comprehensive. Renovation of the library, funding for the struggling school system, an economic development plan aimed at bringing sustainable jobs back to the area. This is substantial, he finally said, looking up at her with confusion. Why Millfield? Why come back to a place that cast me out? She finished for him when his words trailed off. She allowed herself a small smile. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Mayor Wallace. The town, and perhaps even me. What she didn't tell him was that it had taken her years to come to this decision. Years of pain and healing, of building herself up from nothing, of learning that the greatest revenge wasn't destruction, but creation. She had returned not to burn Millfield to the ground, but to raise it higher than it had ever been, and in doing so, to finally lay to rest the ghost of the girl who had been forced to leave. The mayor was staring at the bottom line, a seven-figure investment that would breathe life back into the dying town. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the memory of what they had done to her versus the salvation she was now offering. There are no strings attached, she assured him. Though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. There would be no formal conditions, no contracts demanding apologies or acknowledgements. But the town would know who their benefactor was. They would have to reconcile their past actions with her present generosity. That was enough for Ujeta. I'll need to discuss this with the town council, he said finally. Of course. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I've taken a room at the Millfield Inn. I'll be here for at least a month, overseeing the initial stages of the project, assuming the council approves. He stood as well, extending his hand across the desk. We'd be fools not to, Ms. Reynolds. As their hands met, she felt the first piece of her plan click into place. But this was just the beginning. There were deeper wounds to heal, harder truths to face, including her own. Outside the mayor's office, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square. Ujeta paused, allowing herself a moment to absorb the reality of where she was, of what she was doing. She had spent so many years planning this return that it felt almost surreal to actually be here, breathing this air, walking these streets. Her next stop would be the hardest, the small blue house at the edge of town where she had grown up, where her mother still lived, where the most painful rejection of all had occurred. As she walked, she rehearsed what she would say, how she would stand, whether she would allow herself to cry. But all her preparations scattered like leaves in the wind when the front door opened before she even knocked, and there stood Warian. Reynolds, 15 years older, but with the same soft eyes that had once looked at her daughter with such conflicting emotions of love and disappointment. "Ujeta," her mother whispered, her hand flying to her heart. And just like that, Ujeta was 19 again, standing on this same porch with tears streaming down her face, begging for understanding that never came. "Hello, Mom," she said, her carefully constructed composure threatening to crumble. "May I come in? If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type ZO. It helps me create even better content for you." Continuing. Warian's kitchen smelled the same, cinnamon and coffee, with undertones. Of the lavender soap she had always used to wash the dishes. Ujeta sat at the small wooden table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't asked for, but accepted anyway. Her mother moved nervously about the room, straightening things that didn't need straightening, filling the silence with trivial observations about the weather, the neighbors, the new stoplight at the town's main intersection. They were avoiding the elephant in the room, the 15 years of silence, the unresolved pain, the absence of Ujeta's father, whose empty chair at the head of the table spoke volumes. "He died 3 years ago," Warian finally said, following Ujeta's gaze to the chair. "Heart attack. It was quick." Ujeta nodded, absorbing the information without visible emotion. She had rehearsed this moment too, prepared herself for the news of her father's passing. She had imagined she might feel relief, or perhaps a vindictive satisfaction. Instead, there was only a hollow ache, a grief, not for the relationship they'd had, but for the one they never would. "I wrote to tell you," her mother continued, her voice small. "The letter came back, you had moved." "I moved a lot," Ujeta replied. The simple statement covering years of uncertainty, of starting over in different cities, of building a life piece by precarious piece. "I should have sent you my new addresses." The unspoken question hung between them. Would it have mattered? Would they have reached out if they could have found her? "You look well," Warian said, finally taking a seat across from her daughter. "Successful." There was a hint of pride in her voice that caught Ujeta off guard. She had expected recrimination, perhaps a renewal of the old arguments, not this tentative approval. "I am," she confirmed. "I've built something, Mum, something important." And so she explained about her foundation, her work with struggling communities, the plans she had for Millfield. She watched her mother's expression shift from confusion to amazement. "But why?" Warian asked when Ujeta finished. "Why come back here after everything?" Ujeta took a slow sip of her tea, considering her answer. The truth was complex, layered with emotions she was still untangling. "Because running away solved nothing," she finally said. "Because I needed to face this place again, not as that frightened, angry girl, but as the woman I've become." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong," she whispered, the admission so unexpected that Ujeta nearly dropped her mug. "Your father, me, the town. We were wrong about you, about what you were." The words Ujeta had longed to hear for 15 years now hung in the air between them, both healing and reopening old wounds. She reached across the table, taking her mother's weathered hand in hers. "Thank you," she said simply, "but that's not why I'm here. I'm not looking for apologies." "Then what are you looking for, Ujeta?" her mother asked, squeezing her hand. She thought of the empty library, the struggling school, the foreclosure notices on the mayor's desk. She thought of the girl she had been and the woman she was now. "Redemption," she answered, "for all of us." The word seemed to fill the small kitchen, expanding until it touched every corner of the room. Redemption, not forgiveness, which implied an ending, but something more dynamic, more ongoing, a process rather than a destination. Later, as twilight deepened into night, Ujeta stood on the porch of the Millfield Inn, watching as lights came on in windows across town. Tomorrow would bring the town council meeting, where her proposals would be officially presented. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations with the past. But tonight, in this moment of quiet, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the day, of the courage it had taken to walk these streets again, to face her mother, to speak of redemption instead of revenge. The girl who had left Millfield would have found it unbearable. The woman who had returned recognized it as necessary. She turned to go inside when she noticed a figure approaching along the darkened street. As it came closer, Ujeta recognized the distinctive gait, the broad shoulders. Blake Thompson, once her closest friend, then silent witness to her humiliation. The boy who had loved her but lacked the courage to stand by her when it mattered. Now a man, He stopped at the bottom of the inn's steps, looking up at her with a complexity of emotions she couldn't begin to untangle. "Ujeta," he said, her name a prayer and a question all at once. "I heard you were back." News travelled fast in small towns, it always had. She nodded, neither inviting him closer nor sending him away. 15 years, he continued, running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she remembered from their youth. "You look different." "So do you," she replied, noting the lines around his eyes, the mature set of his shoulders. The boy had become a man, just as she had become a woman. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words, questions without easy answers. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Your mother called me. Told me what you're planning to do for the town." He shook his head in disbelief. "After everything, you're coming back to help us?" There was genuine confusion in his voice, and something else, admiration perhaps, or shame. "I'm not doing it for thanks," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "No, I don't suppose you are." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "The town council meets tomorrow. I'm on it now, have been for the past 5 years. This was news to her. She had researched the town thoroughly, but hadn't looked into the council's composition. "Will you vote in favor of my proposals?" He looked at her steadily, without hesitation. "But that's not why I came tonight." "Why did you come, Blake?" She was suddenly tired, the emotional strain of the day catching up with her. "To say I'm sorry," he said simply, "for not speaking up then, for letting them drive you away, for being a coward." The apology she had sworn she didn't need or want now stood before her, embodied in this man whose silence had once hurt almost as much as others' active cruelty. She didn't know what to do with it, how to respond. "It was a long time ago," she finally said, the words inadequate but all she could offer in the moment. "Not long enough to forget," he countered. "Not for me, anyway." She studied him in the dim light from the inn's porch lamp. This wasn't the boyish Blake she remembered, the one who had kissed her behind the school bleachers and promised forever, only to stand mute as the town turned against her. This was someone else, someone who had lived with his choices, who had perhaps grown from them. "There's a lot of work to be done here," she said, deliberately changing the subject. "The library, the school, economic development. I could use local insight." He recognized the olive branch for what it was. Not forgiveness exactly, but an opportunity, a beginning. "I'd be honored to help," he said, a smile ghosting across his face. "Just tell me where to start." "Tomorrow," she replied, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. "After the council meeting." He nodded, understanding her need for space. "Tomorrow, then." He started to turn away, then paused. "Ujeta." "Yes. Welcome home." The words hung in the night air as he walked away, leaving her to wonder if Millfield could ever truly be home again. Or if, perhaps, home was something she now carried within herself, regardless of where she stood. What will the town council decide? Will they accept Ujeta's help despite their troubled history? Or will old prejudices resurface, threatening to drive her away once more? The town hall was filled to capacity the following morning. Word had spread overnight about Ujeta's return and her extraordinary proposal. Curious faces turned as she entered, conversations hushing momentarily before resuming with increased intensity. She recognized many of them, older now, but essentially unchanged. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery, Mr. Gallagher, who had taught history, the Winslow twins, now grown men with families of their own, and in the corner, arms crossed defensively, Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose whisper campaign had once destroyed a young girl's reputation. Mayor Wallace called the meeting to order, his gavel quieting the murmurs that rippled through the room. Ujeta sat in the front row, her posture perfect, her expression composed. She had dressed with deliberate care that morning, a navy blue suit that conveyed professionalism without ostentation, her mother's simple pearl earrings her only jewelry. "As many of you have heard," the mayor began, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "we have a proposal before us today that could significantly impact the future of our town. Ms. Ujeta Reynolds has established a foundation dedicated to revitalizing small American communities, and she has chosen Millfield as its first beneficiary." A buzz of whispers followed this announcement. The mayor continued, outlining the key components of Ujeta's proposal: the library renovation, the school funding, the economic development initiatives. As he spoke, Ujeta surveyed the room, noting the shifting expressions: skepticism, hope, curiosity, and in some cases, unmistakable discomfort. When he finished, the mayor invited her to address the council and the assembled townspeople. Ujeta approached the podium with measured steps, aware of every eye upon her. This was the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated for 15 years. "Thank you, Mayor Wallace," she began, her voice clear and steady. "As many of you know, I grew up in Millfield. I left under difficult circumstances, but I never forgot this town or the formative role it played in my life." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. No one stirred, no one whispered. They were listening, truly listening, perhaps for the first time. "The foundation I've established focuses on communities that have strong potential, but face significant challenges. Communities with rich histories and uncertain futures. Communities like Millfield." She proceeded to elaborate on her vision, speaking not of the past, but of possibilities, of renewal, of a future where Millfield might thrive again. She spoke of the library as a center for learning and community gathering, of the school as a beacon of opportunity, of economic initiatives that would bring sustainable growth rather than quick fixes. "I'm not here to impose my ideas," she concluded. "I'm here to offer resources and partnership. The decisions about Millfield's future must come from within Millfield itself. All I ask is that you consider this opportunity with open minds and forward-looking hearts." As she returned to her seat, the room remained silent for a beat before erupting into a cacophony of voices. The mayor struggled to maintain order, finally calling for council members to speak. Ex-Lice Johnson, the town's longest-serving councilwoman, spoke first. "While the financial benefits are undeniable," she said, her tone measured, "I must ask the question that I believe is on many minds. Why now, Ms. Reynolds? Why return after all this time with such generosity?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Ujeta knew this moment would come, the questioning of her motives, the suspicion that she harbored some hidden agenda. Before she could rise to respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Does it matter?" All heads turned toward Blake Thompson, who had stood from his seat at the council table. His expression was earnest, his voice firm. "Does it matter? Why, she's offering to help. Millfield is dying. We all know it. We've watched businesses close, young people leave, infrastructure crumble. Ms. Reynolds is offering us a lifeline. Are we really going to question it because of events that happened 15 years ago?" His words seemed to hit home, especially coming from him, a respected local, a fourth-generation Millfield resident, a man whose family had deep roots in the community. "I, for one, am grateful," he continued, "not just for the financial investment, but for the belief in our town that it represents. Ms. Reynolds could have chosen any community for her foundation's first project. She chose us. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why that makes us uncomfortable rather than questioning her motives." The room fell quiet as his words sank in. Ujeta felt a surge of unexpected gratitude toward Blake. He had failed to stand up, For her 15 years ago. Now he was making amends in the most public way possible. Mayor Wallace cleared his throat. Other council members? One by one they spoke. Some expressed enthusiasm, others cautious support. A few voiced concerns about dependency or loss of local control, which Ujeta addressed calmly, explaining the Foundation's philosophy of community empowerment rather than top-down solutions. Finally, inevitably, Mrs. Henderson rose from her seat in the corner. Ujeta felt her spine stiffen, preparing for the attack she had known would come. "I've lived in Millfield for 67 years, the older woman began, her voice carrying the authority of age and long residency. "I've seen good times and bad. I've seen people come and go." Her eyes fixed on Ujeta with an intensity that transported them both back 15 years. "And I've seen people change." The room held its breath, waiting for the condemnation that seemed poised to follow. "Young lady," Mrs. Henderson continued, addressing Ujeta directly, "I owe you an apology. What this town did, what I did, was wrong. We judged you harshly for being different, for challenging our narrow ideas about how a young woman should behave. We punished you for having the courage many of us lacked." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Henderson, the moral authority of Millfield, the arbiter of propriety, was admitting fault, publicly and without qualification. "If you've come back to help us despite all that, then I can only see it as a sign of extraordinary character," she concluded. "And I, for one, believe we would be fools to refuse such grace." Tears threatened at the corners of Ujeta's eyes, but she blinked them back. This was not a moment for emotional display, but for dignity. She inclined her head slightly toward Mrs. Henderson, acknowledging the apology without making a spectacle of it. The vote that followed was unanimous. The town council accepted Ujeta's proposal with gratitude and commitment to partnership. As the meeting adjourned, people approached her, some to express thanks, others to reconnect, a few to offer their own quiet apologies for past wrongs. Through it all, Ujeta maintained her composure, gracious but reserved. This wasn't about personal vindication, it was about community transformation. Still, as she finally stepped outside into the bright midday sun, she allowed herself a moment of private triumph. The first major hurdle had been cleared, and with it, some of the ghosts of her past had begun to fade. Blake waited for her on the town hall steps, his expression a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "That went well," he said as she approached. "Better than expected," she agreed. "Thank you for what you said in there." He shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. It was just the truth. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as townspeople dispersed, many casting curious glances their way. "So," he finally said, "where do we start?" Ujeta looked down the street toward the boarded-up library, the building that had once been her refuge. "There," she decided. "We start by bringing the books back." The weeks that followed transformed, not just the physical landscape of Millfield, but its emotional terrain as well. The library renovation became a community project, with volunteers showing up daily to help clear debris, repair shelving, paint walls, and catalog donated books. Ujeta worked alongside them, rolling up her sleeves, getting paint in her hair, laughing with people who had once refused to look her in the eye. She had hired a professional construction team for the structural work, but the interior restoration became a labor of love for the town itself. Children made artwork for the walls of the new children's section. Teenagers organized a book drive that brought in thousands of volumes. Retired teachers offered to staff reading hours and homework help sessions once the library reopened. As she worked, Ujeta observed the subtle shifts in how the town interacted with her. The initial wariness gave way to curiosity, then to a tentative respect, and finally to something approaching genuine warmth. She was careful not to become too familiar too quickly. maintaining a pleasant professional distance that protected her still-healing heart, while allowing for meaningful connections to form. Her mother became a regular presence at the library worksite, bringing homemade lemonade and cookies for the volunteers, quietly rebuilding her relationship with her daughter through shared purpose rather than direct confrontation of the past. They spoke more freely now, though there were still boundaries, still topics they carefully avoided. Blake proved to be an invaluable ally, using his local connections to expedite permits, recruit volunteers, and navigate the complex web of small-town politics. They developed a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared vision, both carefully avoiding any reference to what they had once been to each other. The past remained the past, acknowledged but not revisited. Have you ever had to return to a place that once hurt you? Or do you know someone who faced the challenge of coming back to confront their past? Share your experience in the comments. By the time autumn deepened into winter, the library renovation was nearly complete. Ujeta stood in the main reading room, admiring the transformation. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new lighting illuminated comfortable reading areas, and the shelves were once again filled with books of every kind. Computers lined one wall, offering internet access that many local residents couldn't afford at home. A community meeting room had been added, with a schedule already filling up with book clubs, literacy classes, and local history discussions. "It's beautiful," a voice said behind her. Ujeta turned to find Illis Johnson, the councilwoman who had first questioned her motives, standing in the doorway. "Thank you," Ujeta replied. "It's been a community effort." Illis moved further, into the room, running her hand along a shelf of new books. "I was wrong about you," she admitted without preamble. "I thought you were coming back to shame us, to make us feel small for what happened years ago." "That was never my intention," Ujeta said simply. "I see that now." The older woman smiled ruefully. "Pride is a hard thing to swallow in a small town, especially when confronted with such generosity of spirit." Before Ujeta could respond, the main doors burst open, and a group of middle school students tumbled in, their voices echoing in the high-ceilinged space. "Is it true?" one girl asked breathlessly, approaching Ujeta without hesitation. "Are you really starting a science program at the school?" News traveled fast in Millfield. It always had. The school initiative was the next phase of her plan, but she hadn't announced it publicly yet. "We're exploring some educational enrichment opportunities," she answered diplomatically, aware of Illis, watching the interaction with keen interest. "My brother said you used to live here," another student chimed in. "He said you were like a rebel or something." Ujeta couldn't help but laugh at this characterization. "I was different," she acknowledged. "And sometimes being different in a small town can be challenging." "I'm different too," the first girl said with a solemnity that touched Ujeta's heart. "My mom says I ask too many questions." "There's no such thing as too many questions," Ujeta replied gently. "The world belongs to the curious." As the students continued their exploration of the library, Illis caught Ujeta's eye. "You're good with them," she observed. "Ever thought about teaching?" "It wasn't my path," Ujeta said, though she didn't elaborate on the dreams that had been derailed by her abrupt departure from Millfield. The college scholarship she had lost, the directions her life might have taken under different circumstances. "Well, perhaps you could guest lecture sometimes," Illis suggested. "Share your experiences. These kids could use some broader perspectives." The irony wasn't lost on Ujeta, that the same qualities that had once made her an outcast were now being viewed as valuable, as something to share rather than suppress. "I'd like that," she said sincerely. Later that evening, as snow began to fall gently outside the windows of the Millfield Inn, Ujeta reviewed her plans for the school initiative. The budget was substantial, focusing on STEM education, arts, programming and vocational training, areas that had been cut from the curriculum due to financial constraints. She was deep in concentration when a knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Blake, dusted with snow, holding a manila envelope. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but I thought you'd want to see this right away." She invited him in, curious. He handed her the envelope, watching intently as she opened it, and withdrew a stack of photographs. They were black and white, clearly taken some time ago. Images of Millfield in its heyday, when the main street bustled with shoppers, when the factory at the edge of town employed hundreds, when the community gathered for festivals and celebrations. "Where did you find these?" she asked, leafing through them with growing interest. "Town archives," he explained. "I've been digging around, trying to understand when and why things started to decline here. These are from the 1960s, before the factory closed, before the highway bypass redirected traffic away from downtown." Ujeta studied a photograph of the town square during what appeared to be a 4th of July celebration. Families picnicked. On blankets, children played games. A band performed on a makeshift stage. The vibrancy was palpable, even in the faded image. "This is what we could be again," Blake said quietly, "not stuck in the past, but with that same sense of community, of purpose." She looked up at him, struck by the passion in his voice. "You really love this town," she observed. "I do," he admitted. "Despite its flaws, despite what happened, this is home." "Even though it's dying," she challenged gently. He shook his head. "It's not dying anymore. You've made sure of that." He gestured to the papers spread across her desk. "The library, the school, whatever else you have planned. You're breathing life back into Millfield." "We are," she corrected him. "All of us together." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued to examine the photographs. There was an ease to their interaction now that hadn't been there before. A rhythm developed through weeks of working side by side, of shared purpose and growing mutual respect. "Ujeta," he finally said, her name still sounding like a question on his lips, "why did you really come back?" It was the question she had been waiting for, the one she had prepared multiple answers for, depending on who asked. But looking at Blake now, at the man he had become, at the genuine concern in his eyes, she found herself setting aside her prepared responses. "Because I needed to," she said simply. "For myself as much as for the town. I needed to face this place again, to reconcile with it, to make peace with what happened, and maybe to show that girl I once was that she wasn't wrong for being who she was." His expression softened with understanding. "She wasn't," he agreed. "We were wrong for not seeing her value." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with history and unspoken emotion. Ujeta knew they were treading dangerously close, to territory she had deliberately avoided. Their personal past, the feelings that had once existed between them, the betrayal she had felt at his silence. "It's getting late," she said, deliberately shifting the conversation back to safer ground. "And we have the school board meeting tomorrow morning." He recognized the boundary she was setting and respected it, gathering the photographs back. "Into the envelope. Of course. I'll see you there." As he moved toward the door, she called after him. "Blake?" He turned, a question in his eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for the photographs, for helping with all of this, for seeing me now." Something flickered across his face, regret, perhaps, or longing, but he simply nodded. "Good night, Ujeta." After he left, she stood at the window watching the snow transform Millfield into a winter wonderland, blanketing the town's imperfections under a clean, white covering. It was beautiful, this place that had shaped her, hurt her, expelled her, beautiful and flawed and complicated, like the people who called it home, like herself, like the tangled history that bound them all together. She wondered, not for the first time, What would happen when her work here was done? Would she leave again, returning to the life she had built elsewhere? Or would she find enough healing here to consider staying, to reclaim this place as her own? The answer wasn't clear yet, and she was learning to be patient with uncertainty, to let the future reveal itself in its own time. For now, there was tomorrow's meeting, and the day after that, and all the days of work and rebuilding that stretched before her. One step at a time, she was rewriting her story, not erasing the painful chapters, but adding new ones filled with purpose and possibility. And perhaps that was redemption enough. The school board meeting proved to be another turning point. Ujeta presented her plans for educational enrichment, science labs equipped with modern technology, an arts program that included music, visual arts and theatre, vocational training that would prepare students for jobs in growing fields rather than the dying industries of the past. The board members listened with increasing enthusiasm as she outlined not just the financial investment, but the philosophical approach. Education as the foundation of community revitalization, as the key to keeping young people in Millfield rather than losing them to cities and suburbs. This is extraordinary, the superintendent said when she finished. But Ms. Reynolds, I must ask, why focus so much on our small town? Surely there are communities with greater need, with more potential for impact. It was a fair question, one that echoed Illis Johnson's earlier skepticism, though without the suspicion. Ujeta considered her response carefully. Millfield shaped me, she answered simply, for better and worse. I believe in investing where you have roots, where you understand the challenges intimately, and I believe this town has untapped potential that just needs the right nurturing to flourish. Her answer seemed to satisfy the superintendent, and the meeting proceeded with discussions of implementation timelines, hiring needs, and curriculum development. By the end, the board had unanimously approved her proposals, with a tentative start date for the new programs at the beginning of the next semester. As people filed out of the meeting room, Ujeta found herself approached by a woman she recognized as her former English teacher, Mrs. Crawford, now grey-haired, but with the same keen eyes that had once encouraged a bookish, outspoken teenager. I always knew you'd do something remarkable, the older woman said, clasping Ujeta's hands in hers. I just never imagined it would be for us. Ujeta felt a rush of emotion at the unexpected encounter. Mrs. Crawford had been one of the few adults who had truly seen her potential, who had defended her when others criticized. Your classroom was the one place I felt understood, she admitted, and now you're creating that space for a new generation, Mrs. Crawford said with evident pride. Would you consider speaking to my senior literature class? They're studying personal narratives and yours. Well, it's quite the journey. The invitation touched her deeply. I'd be honored, she said, meaning it. Winter deepened, and with it, Ujeta's connection to Millfield. The library reopened with a celebration that drew nearly the entire town. Children rushed to get new library cards, seniors gathered for coffee and conversation in the community room, and teenagers claimed the study spaces equipped with computers and free internet. The school programs were taking shape, with new teachers hired and equipment ordered. And most surprising of all, businesses were beginning to take notice of the changes. A craft brewery announced plans to renovate one of the empty storefronts on Main Street. An artisan bakery followed suit. There was talk of a farmer's market in the town square come spring. Ujeta watched these developments with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Her foundation's investment was serving as a catalyst, sparking a renewal that extended beyond her specific projects. People were beginning to believe in Millfield again, to see possibilities where before they had seen only decline. Her relationship with her mother continued to heal, though the process was not without its painful moments. One evening, as they sat in Warian's living room going through old photo albums, her mother paused on a picture of Ujeta at 17. wild-haired, bright-eyed, standing defiantly by the river that ran through town. "You were always so fearless," Warrior said, her voice thick with emotion. "It terrified me." Ujeta looked at her younger self, remembering the girl who had refused to dim her light, who had paid the price for that refusal. "I wasn't fearless," she corrected gently. "I was scared all the time, but I couldn't be anyone else." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I failed you," she whispered. "When you needed me most, I stood by and let us, push you away." They had circled this truth for weeks, approaching and retreating, neither quite ready to face it head-on. Now it lay between them, raw and undeniable. "Yes," Ujeta said, the single word holding years of hurt, of abandonment, of nights spent, weeping in strange cities far from home. "You did." Warian flinched but didn't look away. "I've regretted it every day since." "I know," Ujeta replied, and realized as she said it that she did know, had seen it in her mother's eyes that first day, had felt it in the tentative efforts to reconnect, to make amends. "I forgive you, Mom." The words didn't erase the pain or undo the past, but they opened a door to something new, something healing. Warian reached for her daughter's hand, and Ujeta let her take it, the simple contact bridging years of separation. Meanwhile, her working relationship with Vlake had evolved into something approaching friendship. They met regularly to discuss project progress, often continuing their conversations over coffee or dinner. He showed her how Millfield had changed. In her absence, introduced her to new residents, kept her informed about local politics and personalities that might impact her work. She found herself looking forward to these meetings, enjoying his company, his perspective, his dry humor. It was during one such dinner at the only restaurant in town, a family-owned Italian place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, that he finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Do you ever think about us?" he asked abruptly, setting down his fork. "About what might have been if things had been different?" The question caught her off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. The growing ease between them, the shared glances, the occasional lingering touch, they had been building toward this moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, deciding honesty was the only fair approach. "But we can't go back, Vlake. We're different people now." "I know that," he said quickly. "I'm not suggesting we try to recapture the past. What I'm asking is, could there be a future? Something new based on who we are now?" Ujeta gazed at him across the table. This man who had once been a boy she loved, who had hurt her through his silence, who was now integral to her work in Millfield. Did she trust him? Could she? More importantly, could she trust herself to open her heart again in this place that had once broken it so thoroughly? "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "I'm still finding my footing here, still healing. And my work, it's complicated enough without adding personal entanglements." He nodded, accepting her uncertainty without pushing. "I understand. Just know that if you're ready to explore that question further, I'll be here." The moment passed, their conversation returning to safer topics, the upcoming school programs, the new businesses eyeing Millfield, the spring festival the town was planning to celebrate its emerging renewal. But something had shifted between them, a possibility acknowledged if not immediately pursued. As January gave way to February, Ujeta's visit to Mrs. Crawford's literature class became a turning point in how the younger generation of Millfield viewed her. Speaking honestly about her experiences, about being different in a place that valued conformity, about leaving and building a life elsewhere, about choosing to return with purpose rather than resentment, she connected with the students in a way that surprised even her. "Were you scared?" one girl asked, her voice small but determined. "When you left, I mean." "Terrified," Ujeta admitted. "I was 19, alone, with very little money and no real plan. But sometimes the thing that scares you is also the thing that saves you. Another student, a boy with thoughtful eyes, raised his hand. Do you regret coming back after how people treated you? It was the question she had asked herself countless times during her first weeks back in Millfield. No, she said after a moment's reflection. Coming back has helped me understand that place, and people are not static. Both can change, can grow, including me. The discussion continued, ranging from personal courage to community responsibility, from the pain of exclusion to the power of forgiveness. When the bell rang, several students lingered, asking more questions, sharing their own experiences of feeling different, seeking her advice. She realized with a start that she had become something she never expected to be in Millfield. A role model. What's going to happen next? Will Ujeta accept Vlake's romantic interest? Will the town fully embrace her vision for renewal? And will she finally find the peace she's been seeking in the very place that once rejected her? Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed perfectly aligned with Millfield's transformation. The school's new programs were thriving, the library had become a community hub, and Main Street was showing signs of economic revival. Throughout it all, Ujeta remained the calm center, guiding without controlling, offering resources while encouraging local ownership of the changes taking place. Her foundation work occasionally took her away from Millfield, board meetings in Chicago, conferences where she shared the emerging success story, meetings with potential donors interested in expanding the model to other communities. Each time she returned, she found herself oddly relieved to see the water tower on the horizon, to drive down familiar streets, to be greeted by name at the Millfield Inn, which had become her semi-permanent residence. It was after one such trip, as April painted the town with dogwood blossoms and redbud trees, that Mayor Wallace approached her with an unexpected proposal. "The town council has been discussing the old Reynolds property," he said, referring to a parcel of land that had once belonged to her grandparents, situated at the edge of town with a view of both the river and the rolling hills beyond. "It's been sitting vacant since your grandmother passed, and well, we were thinking it might make a good permanent headquarters for your foundation's work here." Ujeta had childhood memories of that land, of summers spent exploring the woods, of family picnics by the river, of her grandmother's stories told on the wide front porch of the house that had stood there until a fire claimed it years ago. "It's still in the family, then?" she asked, surprised. The mayor nodded. "Your mother has held on to it all these years, paid the taxes even when money was tight. She never said why, but she was keeping it for me," Ujeta realized aloud. Another piece of evidence of her mother's quiet hope for reconciliation, for her daughter's return. "Would you consider it?" he pressed. "The council is prepared to offer some tax incentives, and the location is perfect. Close enough to town to be accessible, but with enough space for whatever you might need." The offer took her by surprise. She had been planning to wrap up the most intensive phase of her work in Millfield by summer's end, to transition to a more remote oversight role while the foundation moved on to its next community project. A permanent headquarters implied a permanent presence, a commitment to Millfield as more than just the first stop on her foundation's journey. "I'll need to think about it," she told the mayor honestly. "Discuss it with my board, but thank you. It's a generous offer." Later, that evening, she walked to the property alone, following the dirt road that led to what had once been her grandmother's house. The foundation remained, stone steps leading to nowhere, but the land itself was beautiful, wild and overgrown in places, but with the bones of something special still visible beneath the neglect. She was so absorbed in her thoughts, in the memories the place evoked, that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until Vlake spoke. "Your mother said I might find you here," he explained when she startled at his voice. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." "It's fine," she assured him, gesturing for him to join her on the stone steps. "I was just remembering." He sat beside her, respecting her contemplative mood with comfortable silence. They watched the sunset together, the sky transforming from blue to gold to deepening purple, the first stars appearing like distant promises. "The mayor told me about the council's offer," he finally said. "It's a good spot for what you're doing." She nodded, still uncertain. "It would mean staying," she said, giving voice to what was really troubling her, making Millfield home again. "Is that so terrible?" he asked gently. She considered the question seriously. Was it terrible? This town had wounded her deeply, had rejected her authentic self, had taught her that being different was dangerous, but it had also shaped her strength, her resilience, her determination to create spaces where others could be accepted as they were. And over these past months, it had shown its capacity for change, for growth, for redemption, just as she had. "No," she finally answered. "Not terrible. Just unexpected. I never thought I'd want to stay." "And now?" he prompted, his voice soft in the gathering dusk. "Now I'm not sure what I want," she admitted. Except... She turned to look at him. This man who had been boy and stranger and colleague and friend, who had failed her once but was trying so hard to make amends. "Except that I'm tired of making decisions based on the past. I want to make them based on the future I hope to build." Something shifted in his expression. Hope, perhaps, or understanding. "That sounds like wisdom to me," he said simply. They sat together as darkness fell completely, the night alive with spring peepers and distant owls, with the gentle rush of the river below and the rustling of new leaves above. There was comfort in the shared silence, in the knowledge that whatever came next, whether she stayed or left, whether they remained friends or became something more, it would be a choice made in freedom, not in fear or obligation or the long shadow of old wounds. The decision to establish a permanent foundation headquarters in Millfield came gradually, emerging from many conversations with her board, with her mother, with community leaders, and most importantly, with herself. The old Reynolds property would be developed thoughtfully, with a main building that honored the land's history while looking toward the future, with gardens and walking paths open to the community, with space for educational programs and community gatherings. Construction began in late spring, with a groundbreaking ceremony that drew people from all corners of Millfield. Ujeta stood with shovel in hand, her mother beside her, surrounded by those who had become partners in the town's transformation. Mayor Wallace, the school superintendent, Mrs. Crawford, Blake, and dozens of others whose names and faces had become familiar over the months of shared work. As she turned the first symbolic shovelful of earth, Ujeta felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. She had left this town broken and alone. She was reclaiming it now on her own terms, with purpose and community and the hard-won wisdom of her journey. The reception afterward, held on the property under a white tent that billowed gently in the spring breeze, had the feeling of a homecoming. People who had once whispered behind her back now sought her out, expressing gratitude for what she had brought back to Millfield, sharing stories of how the library had helped their children or how the new school programs had rekindled their teenagers' interest in learning. Mrs. Henderson approached her near the dessert table, her expression solemn, despite the festive atmosphere. "I've been wanting to speak with you privately," the older woman said, "about the past." Ujeta steeled herself, not certain she wanted to revisit those painful memories on this day of all days. But Mrs. Henderson continued before she could respond. "What I said at the town council meeting, that apology, it wasn't enough," she said firmly. He was the one who started it all, you know, the rumors, the gossip, because you reminded me of myself at your age, before I let this town change me into someone smaller, someone safer. I couldn't bear to see you make the choices I was too afraid to make. The confession, unexpected and raw, caught Ujeta off guard. She had never imagined Mrs. Henderson, proper, judgmental Mrs. Henderson, as someone who had once harboured dreams beyond Millfield's boundaries, who had once been faced with the same choices between authenticity and acceptance. "I forgive you," Ujeta said, the words coming easily now, no longer weighted with the bitterness they might once have carried. "We all do the best we can with what we know at the time." The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "You've taught this old dog a new trick," she said, attempting humor though her voice wavered. "You've taught me that it's never too late to choose differently." As Mrs. Henderson moved away, Ujeta felt another presence at her side. Blake, handsome in a suit she'd never seen him wear before, offered her a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. "To new beginnings," she echoed, allowing herself to truly see him. Not as the boy who had hurt her, not as the colleague who had helped her, but as the man standing before her now, his eyes full of possibilities. Summer arrived in a blaze of green and gold, bringing with it the town's first festival in years, a celebration of Millfield's renewal, with local businesses showcasing their wares, the school's new music program performing in the gazebo, children's, art from the library program displayed along the main street. Ujeta watched it all with a sense of pride, tempered by humility, knowing that while her foundation had provided the catalyst, the true transformation had come from within the community itself. Her mother found her sitting on a bench in the shade, observing the festivities from a slight distance. "You've done something remarkable here," Warian said, settling beside her. "Your father would have been proud." The mention of her father still brought a twinge of sadness, of opportunities for reconciliation forever lost. "Would he?" she asked, genuinely uncertain. "He never seemed to understand me." Warian sighed, her weathered hands twisting in her. "He'd lap." "No, he didn't. But that was his failing, not yours. He was a man trapped by his own narrow views, by what the town expected of him as much as what he expected of you." She reached out, covering her daughter's hand with her own. "But he loved you, Ujeta. In his broken, imperfect way, he loved you. It wasn't everything, but it was something, another piece of healing in a journey that had taught her that healing rarely comes all at once, in dramatic moments of catharsis, but rather in small steps, in quiet recognitions, in the gradual releasing of old pain to make room for new joy. As the festival wound down and twilight softened the edges of the day, Ujeta found herself drawn to the library, her first project, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. It was closed for the holiday, but she had a key, had kept it even after the renovation was complete and regular staff had been hired. The building was cool and quiet, smelling of books and wood polish and possibility. She wandered through the reading room, trailing her fingers along shelves laden with worlds waiting to be discovered, with knowledge waiting to be claimed, with stories waiting to unfold. So different from the boarded-up shell she had found upon her return, yet still fundamentally the same space that had once sheltered a curious, defiant girl who refused to be less than she was. "I thought I might find you here." Blake's voice came from the doorway. "You always did love this place." She smiled, not surprised by his presence. They had developed an almost uncanny ability to find each other in moments of significance. "It's where I first realized there was a world beyond Millfield," she told him, "that there were different ways to live, to be." He moved to join her, by the window, where the last light of day illuminated their faces. "And now you're bringing those different ways back to Millfield itself," he observed. Full circle. Not quite, she corrected gently. A spiral, maybe. Coming back to the same point, but at a different level. The town is different now. I'm different. You're different. Yes, he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. I am. There was a question in his gaze, one they had been circling for months. The Foundation headquarters was nearly complete. Her presence in Millfield, now permanent in a way neither of them had anticipated when she first returned. They had developed a partnership based on mutual respect, shared vision, and growing affection. But there remained an unspoken possibility between them of something more, something deeper, something that honored their past while creating a new future. Ujeta, he began, her name no longer a question on his lips but a certainty. I know, she interrupted softly. Me too. It wasn't the passionate declaration of a romance novel or the dramatic reunion of a Hollywood film. It was quieter, more thoughtful, two people who had known each other at their worst, now cautiously, deliberately choosing to discover each other at their best. She reached for his hand, and he took it, the simple contact conveying what words could not yet fully express. Outside the library windows, Millfield lay bathed in the glow of summer twilight. The town square, with its newly renovated gazebo, the main street with its fresh paint and renewed purpose, the school with its expanded horizons, and beyond it, all the Foundation headquarters taking shape on land that connected Ujeta to her deepest roots. She had returned to this place, not knowing what she would find, whether healing or renewed hurt, whether closure or reopened wounds. What she had discovered was more complex than either extreme. A community capable of both tremendous harm and remarkable growth, people with the capacity to acknowledge past wrongs and work toward a better future. And within herself, a strength built not in spite of her pain, but because of it, a compassion deepened by her own experience of rejection, a vision for renewal born from the very forces that had once driven her away. What happens now? Blake asked, his voice low in the gathering darkness. Ujeta looked out at the town that had both broken and rebuilt her, and then back at the man beside her, a symbol of that same journey from hurt to healing. Now, she said with quiet confidence, we keep building together. As summer deepened into autumn, marking a full year since Ujeta's return to Millfield, the transformation of both the town and its prodigal daughter was undeniable. The Foundation headquarters stood complete on the old Reynolds property, a modern yet welcoming structure that had already become a center for community innovation. The school's new programs had resulted in improved test scores and, more importantly, in renewed student engagement. The library had expanded its offerings to include digital literacy courses, English classes for the growing immigrant population, and community history projects that honored Millfield's past while looking toward its future. Ujeta herself had changed too, finding a balance she had never expected between her wider Foundation work and her personal connection to this specific place. She had moved from the Millfield Inn to a small house near the Foundation headquarters, decorated with a mix of treasured objects from her travels and family heirlooms her mother had kept for her all these years. She had expanded her inner circle, not just Blake and her mother, but friends, old and new, colleagues who shared her vision, community members who had become partners in renewal. Her relationship with Blake had deepened gradually, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a hard-won understanding of each other's flaws and strengths. They moved forward carefully, both aware of the complexity of their history, both committed to creating something healthier and more authentic than what had existed between them in youth. Standing now on the porch of her new home, watching the sunset paint the autumn leaves in shades of fire, Ujeta reflected on the journey that had brought her back to Millfield. She had returned seeking redemption, for herself, for the town that had rejected her, for the painful past they shared. What she had found was something both simpler and more profound, the possibility of transformation, of growth, of becoming more fully herself precisely where she had once been told she didn't belong. The sound of a car in the driveway drew her. From her thoughts, Blake emerged, carrying a box of her mother's apple pies for the Foundation's first anniversary celebration planned for that evening. The gathering would bring together everyone who had contributed to Millfield's renewal over the past year: volunteers, donors, community leaders, and ordinary citizens who had embraced the vision of a town reborn. "Ready?" he asked, setting the box down to take her hand. She looked at him, at the man who had once failed to stand by her, but who had found the courage to try again, to be better, to grow beyond the constraints that had once limited them both. She looked past him to the town spread out below, its lights beginning to twinkle as dusk descended, no longer a place of rejection, but a community of possibility. "Yes," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "I'm ready." Together they walked toward the future they had built, not perfect, not without complications, but authentic and hopeful, and most importantly, theirs to shape with wisdom born of hard experience and hearts opened by the journey home. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.